Victoria Sterling stood before the ornate mirror in the bridal suite of St. Augustine Chapel, her hands trembling as she adjusted the delicate pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. The ivory silk dress hugged her petite frame perfectly, and the morning sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows made her auburn hair shimmer like fire. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her 27 years. The culmination of 3 years with James Blackwood, the successful lawyer she had met at a gallery opening in downtown San Francisco. The chapel buzzed with the excited whispers of 200 guests, including some of the city's most prominent figures. Victoria had spent months planning every detail, from the white roses adorning each pew to the string quartet that would play during the ceremony. As a graphic designer for a prestigious marketing firm, she had an eye for beauty and perfection. And this wedding reflected every dream she had harbored since childhood. Rebecca Chen, her best friend since college, burst through the door wearing the soft lavender bridesmaid dress they had chosen together during a weekend shopping trip in Napa Valley. Rebecca's usually bright smile seemed forced, and her dark eyes held an emotion Victoria couldn't quite identify. They had been inseparable for 8 years, sharing everything from late-night study sessions to career victories and heartbreaks. "Victoria, you look absolutely stunning," Rebecca whispered, but her voice carried an odd tremor. "I need to tell you something important before the ceremony begins." Before Victoria could respond, the wedding coordinator appeared, clipboard in hand and urgency in her voice. "Ladies, we need to start immediately. The groom is waiting at the altar, and our schedule is already running 10 minutes behind." Victoria's heart soared as she imagined James waiting for her, probably adjusting his tie nervously the way he always did when he was excited. He had proposed 6 months earlier during a romantic dinner overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge, presenting her with a stunning 2-carat diamond ring that caught the restaurant's candlelight like a captured star. They had planned a honeymoon in Italy, touring the art museums of Florence and Rome. Combining her passion for visual arts with his love of history, the processional music began, and Victoria felt her pulse quicken with anticipation. Rebecca took her position ahead of her, walking slowly down the aisle as rehearsed. Victoria could see the back of James's head at the altar, his dark hair perfectly styled, his broad shoulders filling out the custom-made tuxedo they had selected together. The guests rose to their feet as the traditional wedding march began, and Victoria started her long-awaited walk toward her future. When dreams collapsed, the first 20 steps felt magical. Victoria glided down the aisle, feeling like a princess from the fairy tales her mother used to read to her. She could see her parents in the front row, her father wiping away tears of joy, her mother beaming with pride. James's family occupied the opposite side, his stern father actually smiling for once, his elegant mother dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. But as Victoria drew closer to the altar, she noticed something wrong in James's expression. Instead of the joy and love she expected to see, his face was pale, almost green, and his eyes held a look of pure terror. He kept glancing at Rebecca, who stood frozen beside the altar, her bouquet shaking in her hands. Victoria reached the altar, her heart hammering against her ribs, sensing that something was terribly wrong. The officiant, Reverend Martinez, began the traditional opening words. But James suddenly held up his hand, stopping the ceremony mid-sentence. The chapel fell into confused silence. 200 guests holding their collective breath. "I can't do this," James said, his voice barely audible, but carrying clearly in the hushed space. "Victoria, I'm so sorry, but I can't marry you." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. She felt the blood drain from her face, and the beautiful chapel seemed to spin around her. The guests erupted in shocked murmurs. She could hear her mother's horrified gasp echoing from the front row. "What are you saying?" Victoria whispered, her voice cracking with disbelief. James looked at Rebecca, then back at Victoria, his face crumpling with guilt and anguish. "I'm in love with Rebecca. We've been trying to fight it for months, but we can't deny it anymore. I'm so sorry, Victoria. You deserve better than this, better than me." The revelation struck Victoria like lightning. Rebecca, her closest friend, the person she had trusted with every secret, every fear, every dream. Rebecca, who had helped her choose this very dress, who had thrown her bachelorette party, who had promised to stand by her side forever. Victoria's legs gave out, and she collapsed to her knees on the altar steps, her pristine white dress pooling around her like spilled milk. The chapel erupted into chaos. Guests jumped to their feet, voices rising in shock and confusion. Camera phones appeared, capturing her humiliation for social media posterity. The string quartet stopped playing abruptly, leaving only the sound of Victoria's ragged breathing and the cruel whispers of the crowd. The mysterious savior through her tears in the haze of shock, Victoria became aware of a commotion at the back of the chapel. A tall figure was moving through the crowd with quiet authority, and the whispered conversations gradually fell silent in his wake. She looked up through her tear-blurred vision to see a man approaching the altar, his presence commanding respect even from the most prominent guests. Nathan Cross was 42 years old, though he looked younger, with silver threading through his dark hair that only added to his distinguished appearance. He wore an impeccably tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Victoria's monthly salary, and his green eyes held an intensity that seemed to see everything and judge nothing. As the founder and CEO of Crosstech Industries, he was worth over $2 billion. But his reputation went far beyond his financial success. Nathan had been attending the wedding as a business acquaintance of James's law firm, but he had noticed Victoria immediately when she began her walk down the aisle. There was something about her grace, her obvious joy, and her genuine beauty that had captured his attention completely. When James shattered her world with his confession, Nathan felt something stir inside him that he hadn't experienced in years. Without hesitation, Nathan removed his suit jacket and approached Victoria with calm determination. He gently placed the jacket around her shoulders, shielding her from the gawking crowd and the invasive camera phones. His touch was gentle but protective, and Victoria found herself looking up into his face with confusion and desperate gratitude. "You don't have to endure this," Nathan said quietly, his voice deep and reassuring. "Let me help you leave with dignity." Victoria nodded weakly, unable to form words through her shock and grief. Nathan helped her to her feet, supporting her with one strong arm while using his body to block the worst of the crowd's stares. He guided her toward a side exit that led directly to the chapel's garden, away from the chaos and the cruel whispers. As they walked, Victoria caught a glimpse of James and Rebecca still standing at the altar, both looking stricken and ashamed. James started to move toward her, perhaps to offer some inadequate apology, but Nathan's cold stare stopped him in his tracks. There was something in Nathan's expression that suggested he was not a man to be trifled with, and James wisely remained where he was. A new beginning. The chapel garden was peaceful, filled with blooming roses and the gentle sound of a stone fountain. Nathan guided Victoria to a marbled bench beneath an ancient oak tree. Far from the curious eyes and cruel tongues inside the building, he sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance while offering silent support. "Thank you," Victoria whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "I don't know why you helped me, but thank you." Nathan studied her face, noting the strength that remained even in her devastation. Most people would have been completely broken by such public humiliation, but Victoria held herself together with a dignity that impressed him deeply, because no one deserves to be treated that way. Nathan replied simply, "And because I recognize strength when I see it, even when it's being tested." Victoria looked at him through her tears, seeing kindness in his green eyes that somehow made her feel less alone in her catastrophic moment. "I don't even know your name." "Nathan Cross," he said, extending his hand formally despite the intimate circumstances. "Victoria Sterling," she replied, shaking his hand and feeling surprised by the comfort his touch provided. Nathan glanced back toward the chapel, where chaos was likely still reigning. "Do you have somewhere safe to go? Family who can take care of you tonight?" Victoria shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I was supposed to be on my honeymoon tomorrow. I gave up my apartment lease last month because James and I were moving in together after the wedding. Everything I own is at his place. I can't face going back there right now." Something shifted in Nathan's expression, decision forming behind his thoughtful eyes. "Then you'll come with me. I have more space than one person could ever need. You shouldn't be alone tonight." Victoria started to protest, but Nathan gently interrupted. This isn't charity or pity. Consider it one human being helping another through a crisis. Tomorrow, you can make whatever decisions you need to make, but tonight, you need safety and peace. As they walked toward Nathan's black Tesla parked at the curb, Victoria caught her reflection in the car's tinted windows. Her makeup was ruined, her hair disheveled, but something in her eyes had changed. The naive trust was gone, replaced by something harder, but potentially stronger. Nathan held the passenger door open for her, and as Victoria settled into the luxury vehicle, she had no idea that this moment of devastating betrayal would become the catalyst for a transformation that would change her entire life. The woman who had been abandoned at the altar was about to discover a version of herself she never knew existed, and the mysterious billionaire beside her would be both the architect of that transformation and its greatest beneficiary, Nathan's. Penthouse occupied the entire top floor of one of San Francisco's most exclusive residential towers, 43 stories above the bustling city streets. As the private elevator opened directly into his living space, Victoria stepped into a world that seemed pulled from the pages of an architecture magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco Bay, while the interior combined modern minimalism with warm, inviting touches that spoke of refined taste rather than cold wealth. The main living area featured comfortable leather furniture and rich earth tones, carefully curated artwork that included original pieces by contemporary masters, and shelves lined with books that showed signs of actual reading rather than mere decoration. Victoria noticed that many of the volumes focused on technology, philosophy, and surprisingly, art history. The space felt lived in despite its obvious luxury, suggesting that Nathan was someone who valued comfort and beauty over mere ostentation. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes appeared as they entered, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and kind blue eyes that immediately assessed Victoria's situation with maternal concern. She had worked for Nathan for over 8 years, managing his household with quiet efficiency while becoming one of the few people he truly trusted. Mr. Cross, Eleanor said with gentle formality, "Shall I prepare the guest suite?" Nathan nodded, his hand still resting protectively on Victoria's shoulder. "The blue room, please, and perhaps some tea and light dinner." "It's been a difficult day." Eleanor's expression softened as she looked at Victoria, taking in the wedding dress, the tear-stained makeup, and the shell-shocked expression. Without asking intrusive questions, she seemed to understand the situation immediately. "Of course, dear," Eleanor said warmly to Victoria. "Let me show you to your room, and I'll bring up some comfortable clothes. We're about the same size, I think." Victoria followed, Eleanor through a hallway lined with black and white photographs of cityscapes from around the world, each one capturing urban beauty in unexpected moments. The guest suite was spacious and serene, decorated in soft blues and whites with a sitting area that overlooked the bay. Fresh flowers sat on the bedside table. Fluffy white towels were stacked neatly in the adjoining bathroom. "Take all the time you need," Eleanor said gently, placing a soft cashmere robe on the bed, along with comfortable jeans and a cream-colored sweater. "There's no rush for anything tonight. Mr. Cross just wants you to feel safe." Discovering Nathan's world after a long, hot shower that seemed to wash away some of the day's trauma along with her tears, Victoria dressed in Eleanor's borrowed clothes and ventured back to the main living area. Nathan had changed from his formal suit into dark jeans and a navy cashmere sweater that made his green eyes even more striking. He was standing at the window wall, looking out at the city lights that had begun to twinkle in the gathering dusk. "Feeling better?" he asked, turning as she approached. Victoria nodded, surprised to find that she actually was feeling somewhat better. The shock was beginning to wear off, replaced by a strange sense of calm that she attributed partly to the peaceful surroundings and partly to Nathan's steady, reassuring presence. "Your home is beautiful," she said, gesturing toward the artwork and the carefully chosen furnishings. "I wouldn't have expected someone in technology to have such an appreciation for art." Nathan smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. "Most people assume that loving computers means you can't love paintings," Actually, both are about creating something meaningful from raw materials. Whether those materials are code or canvas, he guided her to the comfortable seating area where Eleanor had set out a tray with herbal tea, fresh fruit, and delicate sandwiches. As Victoria settled into the plush cushions, she found herself genuinely curious about this man who had rescued her from the worst moment of her life. "What made you help me today?" she asked, accepting a cup of chamomile tea that smelled like comfort itself. "You didn't know me. Getting involved in someone else's drama isn't usually what billionaires do at social events." Nathan considered the question carefully, as if trying to understand his own motivations. "I've seen a lot of cruelty in business. People who use their power to hurt others for personal gain. But what happened to you today wasn't business. It was personal cruelty. I couldn't stand by and watch it happen." He paused, looking out at the city lights. "And honestly, there was something about the way you carried yourself, even in that terrible moment. You were devastated, but not destroyed. That takes strength that most people don't possess." Victoria felt a warmth spread through her chest. That had nothing to do with the tea. When was the last time someone had seen strength in her rather than vulnerability? James had always treated her as someone who needed protection and guidance, making decisions for both of them while positioning himself as the wise provider. Nathan's perception of her felt like discovering a part of herself she had forgotten existed, uncovering hidden depths. Over the following days, Victoria found herself settling into an unexpected routine in Nathan's penthouse. Eleanor treated her like welcomed family rather than an inconvenient guest, and Nathan proved to be a fascinating companion who challenged her intellectually in ways she hadn't experienced in years. Their conversations ranged from technology trends to philosophy, from travel experiences to their shared love of visual arts. Nathan worked from a home office that rivaled most corporate boardrooms, conducting video conferences with team members in London, Tokyo, and Sydney while managing a business empire that spanned multiple continents. Victoria was impressed by his leadership style, which combined decisive authority with genuine respect for his employees' expertise. He solved complex problems with creative thinking that reminded her of the artistic process, finding elegant solutions that others missed during quiet evening hours. They explored Nathan's private library, which occupied an entire wall of the living area. Victoria discovered that his interests went far beyond business, encompassing history, literature, psychology, and surprisingly, trauma recovery. When she asked about the last category, Nathan's expression grew thoughtful. "Everyone carries damage from their past," he said quietly. "The question is whether we let that damage define us, or whether we use it to become stronger and more compassionate." Victoria sensed there were stories behind that statement, depths to Nathan's character that went far beyond his public persona as a successful entrepreneur. She began to notice small details that spoke of a more complex past. The way he sometimes grew distant during phone calls from certain business associates, the security measures throughout the penthouse that seemed excessive even for someone of his wealth, and the careful way he spoke about his family, as if protecting painful memories. One evening, while they were looking through an art book featuring contemporary sculptors, Victoria came across a page that made Nathan close the book abruptly. She had glimpsed a photograph of a bronze sculpture titled "Memorial for the Lost," created by an artist named Sophia Cross. "Sophia Cross," Victoria said gently. "Is she related to you?" Nathan's jaw tightened, and for a moment Victoria thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of old pain. "My younger sister. She died 3 years ago in a car accident. She was an incredibly talented artist, full of life and creativity. That sculpture was her last piece." Victoria felt her heart clench with sympathy. She could see the grief in Nathan's eyes, carefully controlled but still raw around the edges. Suddenly, his compassion for her situation made more sense. He understood what it felt like to have life shatter unexpectedly, to lose something precious without warning. "I'm so sorry," she said softly, reaching out to touch his hand. She must have been very special to inspire such beautiful work. Nathan looked down at their joined hands, and Victoria could see him struggling with emotions he usually kept hidden. She was. Sophia always said that art was about transformation, taking pain and loss and creating something beautiful from it. I've tried to honor that philosophy in how I live my life. Growing connection and hidden dangers. As days turned into weeks, Victoria began to see sides of Nathan that few people ever witnessed. Behind his controlled public persona was a man of deep intelligence and surprising vulnerability. Someone who had built walls around his heart, but was beginning to lower them in her presence. Their late-night conversations became the highlight of her days. Intellectual sparring matches that left her feeling energized and appreciated in ways she had never experienced with James Nathan. Meanwhile, found himself drawn to Victoria's combination of artistic sensitivity and inner strength. She approached problems with creative thinking that complemented his logical mind, and her genuine curiosity about his world reminded him why he had fallen in love with technology in the first place. Her presence brought warmth to spaces that had felt cold for years, and he began to imagine what it would be like to share his life with someone who truly understood him. But their growing connection was complicated by realities that Victoria was only beginning to understand. Nathan's success had come at a cost. His business dealings over the years had created both tremendous wealth and dangerous enemies. The security measures in his home weren't paranoia, but necessity. Protection against competitors and criminals who saw his resources as targets. One evening, while Nathan was in a late-night conference call with associates in Hong Kong, Victoria noticed him speaking in terse, coded language that sounded nothing like his usual business discussions. His expression was harder than she had ever seen it, and she caught fragments of conversation about cleaning up loose ends and permanent solutions to recurring problems. When the call ended, Nathan seemed to realize she had overheard. For the first time since she had known him, he looked genuinely uncomfortable, as if weighing how much truth he could safely share. "Victoria," he said carefully, "there are aspects of my business that I've kept separate from my personal life. Not everything I've had to do to build Crosstech has been pleasant or simple." Victoria felt a chill run down her spine, but she forced herself to meet his eyes steadily. "What kind of aspects?" Nathan moved to the window, looking out at the city lights as if seeking answers in their patterns. "When you're competing at the highest levels of international business, you sometimes have to make choices that ordinary people never face. Choices about loyalty, about protecting what you've built, about neutralizing threats before they can destroy everything you care about." The carefully chosen words carried implications that Victoria found both frightening and strangely exciting. She was beginning to understand that Nathan's world operated by different rules than the comfortable, predictable life she had known with James. There were stakes here that went beyond quarterly profits and social approval. Real consequences that required strength and courage she wasn't sure she possessed. But as she looked at Nathan's profile, silhouetted against the city lights, Victoria realized that she had already made her choice. The woman who had been abandoned at the altar might have run from such complications, but the woman she was becoming wanted to understand this complex man completely, even if it meant venturing into territory that would test her courage in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The foundation for everything that would follow was being laid in these quiet evening conversations, in the growing trust between them, and in Victoria's dawning realization that she had found not just sanctuary in Nathan's world, but a kind of love that would demand everything she had to give. 3 months had passed since Victoria's world collapsed at St. Augustine Chapel, and she had settled into a new rhythm of life that felt both surreal and surprisingly natural. Her graphic design work had taken on new dimensions as Nathan connected her with international clients who appreciated her artistic vision, and she found herself creating campaigns for luxury brands and tech startups that challenged her creativity in exciting ways. The trauma of her public humiliation had transformed into a strange kind of strength, as if being tested by fire had revealed capabilities she never knew she possessed. But the peaceful sanctuary Nathan had provided was about to be disrupted in the most unexpected way. Victoria was working in the penthouse's converted studio space, surrounded by digital tablets and color swatches for a new project, when Eleanor appeared in the doorway with an expression of concern. "Victoria, dear, there's someone here to see you. He says his name is James Blackwood, and he seems quite distressed. He's downstairs in the lobby." Building securities waiting for your instructions. Victoria's hands stilled on her work materials, her heart beginning to race with a mixture of anger, anxiety, and curiosity she hadn't expected to feel. James had tried to contact her numerous times in the weeks following the wedding disaster, leaving voicemails that ranged from desperate apologies to accusations that she was being manipulated by Nathan's wealth. She had ignored them all, focusing instead on building her new life. But his physical presence demanded a response she wasn't sure she was ready to give. Nathan appeared behind Eleanor. Having overheard the conversation from his office, his expression was carefully controlled, but Victoria could see the tension in his shoulders and the protective instincts that immediately activated whenever he sensed a threat to her well-being. "You don't have to see him," Nathan said quietly. "Security can escort him out. We can have legal papers drawn up to prevent future contact if that's what you want." Victoria considered the offer, tempted by the safety it represented, but something inside her rebelled against hiding behind Nathan's protection. The woman she had been 3 months ago would have gratefully accepted his shield, but the woman she was becoming needed to face this confrontation on her own terms. "No," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "I need to hear what he has to say, but I want to meet him somewhere neutral, not here. This place is separate from all of that." Nathan nodded with understanding, though she could see he wasn't entirely pleased with her decision. "The Fairmont Hotel has a quiet restaurant. Public enough to be safe, private enough for serious conversation. I can have a car take you there. And I'll wait nearby in case you need anything," confronting the ghost of her former life. Fairmont's restaurant was elegant but understated, with soft lighting and discreet service that allowed for intimate conversations without feeling isolated. Victoria arrived first, choosing a corner table that afforded privacy while keeping her visible to other patrons. She wore a simple black dress that Eleanor had helped her choose, sophisticated without being intimidating, professional without being cold. The transformation from the broken bride of 3 months ago was remarkable. Though Victoria herself was only beginning to understand its full extent, James appeared at exactly the appointed time, and Victoria was struck by how different he looked. The confident lawyer who had once made her feel protected and cherished appeared haggard and uncertain, his usually perfect appearance showing signs of stress and sleepless nights. His dark hair was unkempt, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his eyes held a desperation that made her feel simultaneously sorry for him and grateful for her escape. "Victoria," he said as he sat across from her, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. I wasn't sure you would." She studied his face, noting the genuine remorse there, but also sensing something else, something that felt manipulative despite his apparent sincerity. "You said it was important." "I'm listening." James reached across the table as if to take her hand, then seemed to think better of it when he saw her pull back slightly. "I've made the biggest mistake of my life. Rebecca and I, it was madness. Temporary insanity brought on by wedding stress and fear of commitment. It's over between us, has been for weeks now." Victoria felt a strange detachment as she listened, as if he were talking about people she had once known but no longer cared about. The pain that should have accompanied his words simply wasn't there, replaced by something closer to pity. "I'm sorry that didn't work out for you," she said carefully. "But I'm not sure why you're telling me this." James leaned forward, his eyes brightening with hope that struck Victoria as both touching and naive. "Because I want you back. Because I realize now that what we had was real, and what happened with Rebecca was just cold feet dressed up as grand passion. We can start over, Victoria. We can go back to the way things were before everything got so complicated." The offer hung between them like a bridge back to her former life, and Victoria found herself examining it with curiosity rather than temptation. She could return to the comfortable predictability of being James's girlfriend, eventually his wife, living the life she had planned before Nathan Cross walked into her world and changed everything. It would be safe, socially acceptable, free from the complex moral ambiguities that came with loving a man whose business dealings operated in gray areas. She was still learning to navigate. But as she considered James's proposal, Victoria realized that the woman who would have been grateful for his return no longer existed. The past 3 months had shown her versions of herself that were stronger, more capable, more interesting than she had ever imagined possible. "James," she said gently, "I appreciate your apology, and I forgive you for what happened at the wedding. But I can't go back to who I was before, because I genuinely like who I'm becoming now." James's face crumpled with disappointment, but then hardened with something that looked like anger. "This is about Nathan Cross, isn't it? Victoria, do you have any idea who you're involved with? What kind of man he really is?" Victoria felt her spine stiffen with defensive instincts she hadn't known she possessed. "What are you talking about?" James pulled out his phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be news articles and legal documents. "Crosstech Industries isn't just a technology company, Victoria. Nathan Cross has connections to defense contractors who work with authoritarian governments. He's been investigated for corporate espionage, for using his technology to help dictatorships spy on their own citizens." The accusations hit Victoria like physical blows. But she forced herself to maintain her composure while studying the documents James showed her. The articles were from reputable sources, detailing investigations into Crosstech's international dealings, raising questions about the ethical implications of some of Nathan's business partnerships. "These are just allegations," Victoria said. Though she could hear the uncertainty creeping into her own voice, James leaned closer, his expression a mixture of concern and triumph. "Victoria, he's using you. Don't you see that? A man like Nathan Cross doesn't rescue random women from wedding disasters out of the goodness of his heart. You're a PR asset, a way to clean up his image with a heartwarming story about saving the abandoned bride." The suggestion struck at Victoria's deepest insecurities, the nagging fears she had tried to suppress about Nathan's motivations. Was it possible that her transformation, her growing confidence and sense of worth, had all been part of an elaborate manipulation? The choice that changes everything, Victoria, left the restaurant feeling shaken in ways she hadn't expected. James's accusations echoing in her mind as she rode back to the penthouse. The documents he had shown her raised legitimate questions about Nathan's business practices, and his suggestion that she was being used as a PR strategy struck at fear she had tried to ignore. Nathan was waiting for her in the living room, still dressed in his work clothes, but with an expression of concern that seemed genuine. The sight of him triggered conflicting emotions, love and suspicion, gratitude and fear, desire and doubt, all warring in her chest. "How did it go?" he asked carefully, studying her face with the intensity she had come to associate with his attempts to understand her emotional state. Victoria sat across from him, maintaining distance while she processed everything James had revealed. "He showed me some articles about Crosstech, about investigations into your international business dealings. Are they true?" Nathan's expression didn't change, but Victoria could see something shift behind his green eyes, a kind of resignation that suggested he had been expecting this conversation for months. "Some of them are true," he said quietly. "My company has worked with governments and organizations that operate in moral gray areas. In the technology business, especially at the international level, pure ethical choices aren't always available." Victoria felt her heart sink even as she appreciated his honesty. "What does that mean exactly?" Nathan moved to the window, looking out at the city lights as he had so many times during their evening conversations. "It means that, sometimes, to protect American interests or to prevent worse outcomes, we've provided technology to regimes that aren't perfect. It means I've made choices that I'm not entirely proud of, but that I believed were necessary at the time." The admission hung between them like a chasm. Victoria wasn't sure they could bridge. She had fallen in love with Nathan's strength and complexity, but she was beginning to understand that complexity included moral compromises she wasn't sure she could accept. "And what about me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "James thinks you're using me to improve your public image. Is that why you helped me at the wedding?" Nathan turned from the window, and Victoria was struck by the pain in his expression. "Is that what you think? After everything we've shared, everything we've built together, do you really believe I'm capable of that level of manipulation?" Victoria wanted to say no immediately, but the documents James had shown her and the questions they raised made her hesitate. That hesitation, brief as it was, seemed to wound Nathan more deeply than any accusation could have. "I don't know what to believe anymore," Victoria admitted, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. "3 months ago, I thought I knew James completely, and I was wrong about everything. How can I trust my judgment about you when I was so completely deceived before?" Nathan sat beside her on the couch, close enough to offer comfort, but respecting her need for space. "Victoria, I won't lie to you about my past or my business. Yes, I've made choices that exist in moral gray areas. Yes, I've sometimes prioritized practical outcomes over idealistic principles. But my feelings for you, what we've built together, that has nothing to do with business or public relations." He paused, seeming to gather courage for what he wanted to say next. "I love you, Victoria. Not because of what you can do for my reputation, but because you've brought light back into a life I thought was permanently darkened after Sophia died. You've made me remember what it feels like to hope for something beyond mere success." Victoria looked into his eyes, searching for deception and finding only vulnerability that matched her own. But the questions James had raised couldn't be dismissed entirely, and she realized that loving Nathan would mean accepting parts of his life that challenged her comfortable moral assumptions. The final test, the resolution, came in the most dramatic way possible. 2 days after Victoria's meeting with James, Nathan received a phone call that changed everything. One of his overseas business partners, a man involved in the ethically questionable deals James had mentioned, was threatening to expose confidential information unless Nathan agreed to even more compromising arrangements. Victoria overheard enough of the conversation to understand that Nathan was being blackmailed, and that his response would determine not just his future, but potentially the safety of people who had trusted him with their lives. She watched as he paced the living room, weighing options that had no clear right answers. "What are you going to do?" she asked when he ended the call. Nathan looked at her with an expression that mixed love with desperation. "I'm going to end it. All of it. I'm going to liquidate the questionable overseas operations, take the financial losses, and rebuild Crosstech as a completely ethical enterprise." Victoria stared at him in shock. "That would cost you millions, wouldn't it?" "Maybe hundreds of millions?" Nathan nodded. "It would also mean starting over in many ways. Accepting a significantly smaller business, acknowledging publicly that I've made mistakes I want to correct." Victoria felt her heart racing as she realized the full implication of what he was saying. "You would do that? Give up so much of what you've built?" Nathan moved closer to her, taking her hands in his. "Victoria, I would give up everything I own to keep you in my life. But more than that, loving you has reminded me of the man I wanted to be before grief and anger made me compromise my values. If I have to choose between wealth built on moral compromises and a life with you built on genuine love and respect, there's no choice at all." The declaration broke through all of Victoria's remaining doubts and fears. This was not a man using her for public relations purposes. This was a man willing to sacrifice a fortune to become worthy of her love, to transform himself the way he had helped transform her. Victoria threw her arms around Nathan, feeling the last walls around her heart crumble completely. "I love you," she whispered against his neck. "I love all of you, including the parts that aren't perfect. But I love you even more for being willing to become better." 6 months later, Victoria stood in a small chapel in Napa Valley. Wearing a simple ivory dress and surrounded by the people who truly mattered to both of them, Eleanor was there beaming with maternal pride. Nathan's business associates who had supported his ethical transformation were present, along with Victoria's family, who had grown to love Nathan for his devotion to their daughter. As Nathan slipped a wedding ring onto Victoria's finger, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The woman who had been abandoned at the altar had discovered strength she never knew she possessed. The man who had rescued her had found redemption and renewal in their love. Their first dance was to a song about second chances and new beginnings. And as they moved together in perfect harmony, Victoria knew that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you becomes the doorway to the best thing that ever will. Love had found her at her lowest point and lifted her to heights she never could have reached alone, transforming both of them into people worthy of the extraordinary. life they would build together. The story that began with betrayal and public humiliation had become a testament to the power of genuine love to heal old wounds and create new possibilities, proving that sometimes the most beautiful transformations arise from the ashes of our deepest disappointments.